Good evening. My name is Jeff Smith, and this is the fifth in the series of 6 conversations with Missoula residents. And this evening I'm lucky, very lucky, to have Laura Millin, who's the director of the Art Museum of Missoula, with us tonight. And we're going to be talking about what makes a good museum and what makes a good community and maybe what makes a good political party. Some pretty good subjects, so stick around. Laura, how are you?
Hi.
Had a bad day, huh?
Had a challenging day, yes. I'm glad it's Friday.
So what makes a good museum?
Well, I think that museums are different, you know, very different in different communities, and also according to their size. A small museum is a very different animal from a large museum. But I think what makes a good small museum, which is what we have here in Missoula, is, you know, on the national scale of things, is a museum that is very sensitive to its community and to the context of the cultural riches and the cultural histories and the cultural riches of the community. Yeah. In other words, I think the museum needs to be a responsive institution.
Well, one of the things I see you doing lately that I've never seen, you know, I've been here 20 years now, is bringing people in for things other than museum things. Mm-hmm. You know, you had the International Wildlife Film Festival people come and have a reception mm-hmm. there, and mm-hmm. When some historians were in town, I was able to bring them in town and have them give a public talk at the museum. That's great. It's an open place. It's a mm-hmm. place where people feel like they belong, mm-hmm. and the art becomes part of that, even though it's not directly an art exhibit, mm-hmm. it's the art becomes the background and enriches mm-hmm. the conversation that goes on in mm-hmm. the foreground. So I want to thank you for doing that for people in Missoula. That's great.
I appreciate your acknowledging it. I think that art basically is a process of inquiry. I mean, at base, yeah. That's what art is. And of course, it's an aesthetic inquiry, you know, but it is a process of inquiry, and so I think it's a really appropriate place for inquiry to go on many different levels. I also think that art is often pushing us forward in our thinking in various ways. And so, again, I think to embrace processes and dialogues which are looking at our future here is very appropriate. This past weekend we hosted a low-income charrette process, a day-and-a-half-long meeting in which members from the community looked at how to creatively and aesthetically create more low-income housing for our community. And again, I think the Art Museum is a very good place for that kind of visioning work, for that kind of look at the future and that kind of inquiry. So. And I, you know, also from a practical standpoint, it's one of the ways we try to expand our audience. Art anymore, we don't think of art as having its own narrow little audience. We really think of everyone being a potential audience for art. And so we're always trying to invite in different sectors of the community and also, whenever possible, partner with different sectors of the community.
So there's 3 examples of your opening the museum up. One for mm-hmm. historians, a talk by historians, one for the International Wildlife Film Festival guests, mm-hmm. And the third one for low-income people who are searching for answers for housing yep. in Missoula. You know, one of the things that you told me a story after the Wildlife Film Festival reception of how strong your commitment is to community-based art or Montana-based art. Mm-hmm. Do you want to tell that story? Do you remember the story I'm talking about? That someone came up to you and said, oh, this is really interesting. You should have brought in some New York artists to talk about water and mm-hmm. the importance of water mm-hmm. and water resources.
Right. Okay. Yeah, our current exhibit is really a community-wide project. I'd say it's a really good example of not just opening our doors to different groups, but actually partnering with lots of different organizations and individuals. It's a project that's all about water, and of course the sentiment is a bid for clean water and safe, you know, practices that'll maintain our water and not degrade it. So to do that, we got together with, I think about 12 organizations actually were ultimately at the table at the Art Museum talking about what could be drawn together that could bring art and this concern about water together. And so we have, as a result, a 2.5-month-long forum. At the museum is an exhibit called Waterways, and there are 19 artists in the show. Most of them are Montanans. There are a couple of exceptions. We brought some photographs from Rhode Island, David Hansen's work, and we also brought the work of a Seattle artist, Buster Simpson, in. Two artists from Seattle, actually. Otherwise, it is Montanan. And of course, what would an investigation or an inquiry about water in Missoula be without, the local perspective? That was really our whole impetus in doing it. And when we had the house full of environmentalists from around the world during the International Wildlife Film Festival, one of the guests suggested that we could actually take the step of bringing in some of the prominent artists nationally. And we have done that to some degree. We once did a survey show of environmental projects that involved artists nationally to try to show the scope of possibilities. But we did that only to try to seed the possibilities here, to help artists have ideas maybe, or to see possibilities that they hadn't maybe thought of themselves for the possibilities of art and environmental concern. So I think all the time, I think our goal is to support the community that is here, to recognize the culture that is here, to recognize also the history of that culture, and to shape the future of it. We put in our vote all the time. I think we don't stay neutral. We don't attempt to stay neutral. We stick our neck out and say that we're for clean water and against the Blackfoot mine, and we're an active voice.
When you talk about artists and artists envisioning the future, what part does art play in things like envisioning the future, and things like politics, and things like imagination, and things like kind of sketching the possibilities that are out there? How does the artist relate to all those kind of mundane, everyday realities?
Well, I think that it's a little hard to. It's one of the hardest things to measure. The effect of art on individuals, on society, as a healing mechanism, as a process of inquiry. What is the impact? It's really a hard thing to actually quantify, but I believe that it has a very basic and widespread effect. I think it's one of the primary ways that we create our identity as a people, and also our place. For instance, the place in which we live has been greatly shaped by art. Montana is, I think, one of the most identified places I've lived, and one of the most shaped by art. When you think about things like the way the state is represented in Washington, D.C. in the gallery of statues, that represent all the 50 states, we're represented by Charlie Russell, and that's what Montanans chose to send as the representation of Montana. And
an artist.
Yeah, an artist, and it's the only state represented by an artist. And then I draw to the present moment and what we're looking at with water and with the river, and you look at the fact that the world does know a little bit about the Blackfoot River, and the reason is not just fly fishing, although that's certainly a huge influence, but it's Norman Maclean's book, and then the movie that was made from it. So again, it's culture communicating, and now I think artists are talking about trying to communicate to the world, give them an update on Norman's, river. And I think that that's a powerful backdrop for some of the cultural work we're doing right now about the river and about the mine.
Do you have a definition of artist? What is an artist?
Gosh.
Does it have to do with seeing or taking risks? Or?
Well, I guess one who makes art, and I think that I have a pretty broad definition of art. So, in fact, my interest is in, one of my great interests is in how the arts interact. And if I had my druthers, I wouldn't be working strictly in a visual arts context. I'd be working in an interdisciplinary context, and I do that as much as I can. With the Water Project, for instance, bringing the writers in through the Headwaters book, which Onyx Smith edited, is one of the most powerful elements, I feel, of the whole Water Project. But I also think that architects are artists, and I think designers are artists, and so
multidisciplinary, meaning words and visuals and the place itself and the gallery itself. It all comes together as some sort of whole or some sort of statement.
And I think that, I guess I'm of the belief that everybody is artistic, and everybody, it has a lot to do with just whether those creative, proclivities and abilities were nurtured, in one's life or not. Yeah. Certainly some people are a whole lot more talented than others, but talent and creativity are two different things.
Well, there's an element of focus, too, that an artist chooses to focus intently. Whereas some of us will think of that thing, but pass on and move on to the next thing. But I picture an artist getting stuck, on that thing, and tossing around ideas, and then the ideas giving birth to new ideas and other ideas. And,
what is often said about artists is that they have to do it, and I really believe that that's true, because you're right. I think, as I was just saying, I think we're all creative, and I don't know about you, but I dream creativity all the time. I even dream paintings. That's probably because I'm around them so much. But yeah, I'm not setting down to doing it either. I don't think the artists, most of them, have much of a choice. Certainly, it's not an economic choice.
Well, interesting talking about art and its place. I was talking to Gene Bernofsky last week, and he volunteered that as a young person, he went to see Guernica, the Museum of Art in New York, and came away just changed by it. And I related to him that little scene in Basquiat, the movie where, as a little boy, he goes and he's standing with his mother in front of this giant painting, this wall-sized painting. And he's trying to figure out what the attraction is, and he looks at his mother, and his mother is crying. Yeah. And there are no words shared between them, but he's noticing, he's looking at the power of art right there.
Was it Guernica?
It was Guernica.
She was looking at?
Yeah.
And it's funny because I have to tell you, I saw it once at MoMA, and I will never forget that moment. It's one of those paintings, I think. Yeah. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to measure, although, I did attend an art conference a couple years ago where a couple who had been trying hard to document the experience of art, they had a thesis that it was restful, that a lot of people chose the experience of going to look at art for repose, for rest, for a certain kind of, not rest, a certain kind of repose. It's different than resting.
A brainwave, a certain brainwave that's relaxing.
Exactly. Yeah. And so they were able to some degree to measure that people could have a kind of experience in front of visual art, particularly if they were alone and, it wasn't part of some kind of event or
So downstairs you have this waterways exhibit. Now, how many months went into the planning of that? When did you get started?
Probably 8 or 10 months ago.
And how did that process start? Did somebody come up with an idea, say we should do something on water because of the Blackfoot mine? Or did somebody just say, oh, well, this is something that we've had scheduled for a couple of years, let's do it now?
I think it was really kind of a brainstorm that came out of discussions among the staff. And Barbara Brady, who had moved from North Carolina to Montana to join our staff, had sort of a fresh eye on Montana and was really overwhelmed by how much water was an issue. I think that those of us who have lived in the West for some time are a little bit more accustomed to it being an issue. It's an issue. It is a bigger issue in the West than it is in the East and in the South. She came from a very humid culture, you know, where they're...
Did you say North Carolina?
Right, and then previous to that, Florida. So in part, it was her awareness, but then it really was crystallized by the mine issue. So we work a lot, we work as a team, and we work a lot on, you know, in a circular fashion. I often describe our exhibit program as a landscape that, you know, it's a continuum, you know, and we're always relating to what we've done and what we've got planned as far as what, you know, what we want to put in those galleries.
So you get 360 degrees around that landscape and you start again to pick up new things.
That's right.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's a nice
right.
analogy too.
Yeah, because it isn't cut and dried how we decide. I mean, people often ask us, how do you decide and what's your process? And it's really very...
Well, downstairs you have waterways, and upstairs you have a high school exhibit.
A wonderful collaboration with Missoula Community Access Television and the school system. Yeah, it's a project that was initiated by MCAT, actually, not by the museum staff. But we welcomed it because I think it's, over the years, probably one of the populations that we've been the most anxious to reach and work with, and has been the hardest, is high school, the high school population. So anyway, MCAT, who has raised funds to send artists into the schools to work with the high schoolers and video, proposed this project, and I think it was Joel Baird who came up with the theme, which was a brilliantly simple but I think appropriate theme for the age, begging the question, what would be your perfect room, the perfect room in your mind? And that was the question that they answered in the process. And then they also created just an expressionistic installation to house the video in. So I think it's a very successful project.
And this was not, as I understand it, where you went to high school kids who were identified as artistic, and you asked them to do it. It was more like a random survey of high school kids in Missoula and asking them, if you could, what would be your perfect room?
Right.
And then you videotaped.
Right.
They videotaped.
They did it all, with the assistance of Gwen Hoppy and Joel Baird and Rick Phillips, the three artists that were collaborating on the project with the students. But yeah, they created their backgrounds and their, you know, the visuals that went with the talking head, because it is kind of a talking head project, where the kids answer the question, but they created a lot of dynamic visual aspects to go with the talking heads. And it's quite astounding how specific and intense their visions are. Yeah. I think most adults are surprised by that.
Yeah. Well, I'm always surprised by teenagers. Teenagers, it's almost as if they live in their own world. And it's very difficult for a parent or an adult to enter that world. Teachers do it, but they do it with this kind of distancing, this natural authority distancing that goes on. But to be able to be an artist who can go in and get genuine and honest impressions is unusual. You know?
Yeah, it is rare, and I think it's a good example where art plays a special role again, because, you know, these kids have been through how many years of public school continuously by that point. They're becoming very adult and somewhat independent, and yet they're still in this process of accumulating knowledge. You know, it's rare that they aren't just in a position of regurgitating knowledge that they've been accumulating for now 17 years. And so to ask them their opinion, to ask them to give us their vision, is, in fact, they're quite ready. They have a lot. Yeah. They have a lot of vision. They have a lot to say.
One of the things I studied in college and university was education, and one of the most effective books I ever read was a taxonomy of educational values, and it began with knowledge, being able to spit back facts, and then moved up to comprehension, where you put together different facts, and went on to analysis, where you were able to draw from different facts and reach a separate conclusion. And the highest level, according to this taxonomy, was what you just said, which was evaluation. Being able to take in the facts, being able to filter them through your own process, and come up with some kind of conclusion that you were willing to stand up for. You were willing to talk about it. That according to the educational scholars at that time, which is now, 25 years ago, that being able to evaluate, being able to filter things through your own value system was the highest point of the highest goal of education. And yet, as you said, in education, that is reached very rarely. We go to the least common denominator. We, get facts and comprehension and occasionally analysis. But what you did or what Joel and Gwen and the other artists did was get there. Go, don't mess around with the bottom tiers. Go right to the heart of the matter here.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, again, an artist's vision, and an artist can see that instinctually, that that's where you need to get. Now, how do you get there? You talk about a perfect room. And then bless you for bringing that exhibit to the museum for the rest of us to be able to see.
Yeah, well, I credit MCAD, but thank you. It's just our highest goal, really, is to collaborate like that and present that kind of work, which is both aesthetically very high quality, and also reflects the community.
Yeah. And you haven't shied away from controversy.
Well, no. I mean, I don't think we embrace it either, but I think that there's no avoiding it if you really show the full spectrum of artistic expression. It's a lot of times artists instinctively perceive their job to be, testing taboos, or, maybe speaking of the underbelly, or, that which doesn't get spoken of in our society. I mean, that's just an important aspect of what art does. And so...
in that way, this is a hard time for art.
It is. I think that... yeah, it is. I mean, I'm not sure what to say about that. I think the time will pass, and that it's like a lot of other backlashes. We've seen the backlash to feminism, for instance. We made so many advances with feminism in the 60s and 70s, and then all of a sudden, we see backlash. Let me think of an example, too. In politics. I mean, there's lots of examples in politics. These things go in cycles, I think.
Yeah.
So I just remain.
Well, we're going to take a break here in a couple of minutes. We've still got a couple of minutes to go, but I want to get to that. I want to get to politics. I know you're a member of the New Party, and you went to a convention just recently of the New Party.
Yeah.
One of the things that you hosted at the museum was a strategy session with Joel Beard, who's the founder and the co-founder and director of the New Party.
Joel Rogers.
Joel Rogers, right. Joel Rogers.
Yeah.
And so you're not only directing the museum and involved in art, but you're also trying to follow through with the politics that's involved in the visioning, which is an amazing collection of who you are, of the person.
Well, thanks. I think it's interesting that you make the link actually from the issues of censorship to politics, because that's certainly one of the many issues that drives me to politics.
Yeah, we need to talk about that. Whenever you're ready to cut, we're about ready to go to an intermission. Okay. Well, good.
Yeah. Yeah. I think art has gotten increasingly political, and so I guess one thing I'm trying to do is follow that road.
And that's a double-edged sword.
Difficult. Yeah. Difficult.
One thing is that you want artists to be able to work in an environment where they're free of that burden.
That's right.
To make things correct.
Right.
Or passable. But the other extreme to that is that you're succeeding when you've got the attention of people who are in power. Art is succeeding.
And we're in an era when we have to fight for freedom of expression. So, and we have to do that sometimes by political means.
Yeah. So we're going to take a little break here, give you a rest, give ourselves a rest, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Please join us after the intermission.
This song goes out to the Exxon Corporation.
Thank you for joining us. We're back again talking to Laura Millin, and I want to thank Michael Stipe and REM for that good music video, music interlude here. We were talking about art and how art today it's a hard place to be. It's a hard place to be an artist because on one hand you have to envision the future, you have to envision things that might be a little bit uncomfortable, and at the same time you have to conform to what people in politics say is acceptable. And the last kind of thing that we talked about was that maybe art is being very successful at this time because it's gotten the attention of political leaders. And political leaders are worried about the kind of vision that's coming out of art, and artists are putting forward, and they're moving to restrict or to put art into a context where they have more control over the funding that goes to artists. So welcome back. We've got about 20 more minutes or 25 more minutes of conversation, and thanks for coming back in. Hello again.
Hi. Jeff, I need to, I think, say just a word about funding of the arts and how that is playing into the scenario that you just talked about, the environment basically for art today, and how politics are weaving into it. And it's having a really serious effect here in Montana. As you know, starting in the late 80s and very intensely in the early 90s, the NEA was under attack, and specifically individual artists that were funded by the NEA. Since then, those funds have been cut severely, and also the fellowships to artists it was abolished. You know, it was a program that was abolished at the NEA. So there are virtually not fellowships given to artists anymore with those funds. The exception being a fund that still gives fellowships to writers. Well, how has that affected Montana and the nation? I mean, Montana as an example. Well, I would say 5 years ago, NEA was the #1 funder, public funder of the arts in Montana, both directly to grants to organizations like the Art Museum of Missoula, as well as through our Arts Council. Second was coal tax, the coal tax cultural and aesthetic grants. And third was U.S. West Foundation, and then all the other foundations and other sources fell below that. Well, today, let's see, a few years ago when the NEA had such a severe budget cut, it fell behind the coal tax, cultural and aesthetic grants, and now because of the recent maneuvers in the legislature to fund Virginia City, coal tax will be severely cut. And so the two major sources, the two really significant sources coming into the state won't be there. And U.S. West, on top of that, has refigured their grant program. They still give, but on a much more limited basis. So there's been a really vast restructuring of the funding for the arts in the last half decade, and a lot of that was because of political maneuvers on the part of Republicans, and it's a different it's going to be a different environment because of it. There's going to be big time effects. Just this week, Hellgate Writers here in Missoula declared itself defunct and is moving out of its office, and after 12 years of existence is going to be pulling out of the public arena.
And they did not get the NEA grant that they had gotten before that.
So,
what you say is Republicans. You didn't mince any words. You didn't say that it was politicians. You said that it was Republicans, and that's interesting. And also, I see, the Republicans not in Montana anyway that had control of the Montana legislature, making not only making the backroom decisions or the political decisions to take money from the Cultural and Aesthetic Trust Fund. That wasn't the only choice they had.
No.
I have worked for the town of Virginia City for the past 18 months as a consultant, and I know that there was there were other funding sources out there. One was a 5% tax on rental cars that would have hurt no Montanan. No Montanan would have paid that, or very few Montanans would have paid that. It's a standard in other states. Tourists who come to states and rent a car would have done it without question. They would have just got out their Visa card, put it on the table, said okay, or would not have even noticed it. That would have provided enough money to buy Nevada and Virginia cities. And also the Senate, in Montana, used general funds. They used coal tax money, but not out of the Cultural and Aesthetic Trust.
Right.
And they got that money and left the Cultural and Aesthetic Trust, which is its own board of directors and makes its own decisions on who is funded. And instead, the House ended up being the ones that decided. And what they decided was that they would cut the Cultural and Aesthetic Trust Fund by half. And therefore put artists under a tight leash, say to them, we're going to fund you again. So make sure that your projects are acceptable to the society as a whole, or to us, basically, to the elected representatives, the Republicans who held the purse strings. So there were other choices, and yet when it came right down to it, the choice that came to was the harsh one, the one that put restrictions on art.
And I think that, it's a shame, and I believe that the arts community doesn't have, a really significant lobby, doesn't have an ability to fight for itself in a case like this, like so many other industries do. Tourism, of course, gets coal tax funds also, but you bet they're able to, fight for themselves in the legislative, scenario, whereas the arts really aren't. And, by extension, arts really don't effectively market themselves either. Our mission, cultural and arts organizations are educational organizations at base, and are mission-driven. We spend every penny and every ounce of energy we have, plus a whole lot more that doesn't get paid for, just trying to fulfill an educational mission and contribute to our communities. We don't have the funds, we don't have the energy to lobby when, crises like this come up. And I think it's also, you have to ask the question, what other profession has to defend itself to the degree that the arts have been asked to get up and defend themselves in the nation and in the state in the last 7 years? It's absurd. You have to, it's a problem. And so I come out of this concerned for the arts, concerned for the cultural and aesthetic grants, because I think once rated, it will be rated again, because it's a precedent has been set that was never done before. It's such a beautiful system, and providing really sustaining support for a lot of organizations. The museum in Missoula enjoys a lot of local support. We are supported by the County of Missoula, by the City of Missoula, by the citizens of Missoula who embrace the arts to a large degree. We're very fortunate to receive the degree of local support that we do. We aren't, absolutely dependent on a coal tax grant. But there are organizations that don't have those resources, that are absolutely dependent on that kind of support, or the kind of support that NEA used to provide. So it's a big concern, and I think the other concern that we emerge from that whole issue with is the divisions that it caused within the historic and heritage community and the art community, or between, I shouldn't say within, but between. These two have been natural partners in the past, working together, for instance, to hire a lobbyist. We've shared through the Montana Cultural Lobby, a lobbyist, and whenever there have been issues in the legislature, we've worked pretty well together on those. And this really ripped those two apart.
Yeah.
And
I saw that as being very purposeful, that there was a purposeful pitting of, when you get people within one constituency fighting among each other, then you don't have to worry that other people will be targeted.
That's right. As one person I know put it, they put us all in a room facing each other, and we all had guns, and they said, shoot. It's a little bit like that. It's a little bit like, nobody in the arts community wanted to argue against saving Virginia and Nevada City. Nobody in the, I think everyone in the heritage and historical community didn't want to advocate, raiding the trust.
Right.
It was a no-win situation.
Yeah. So what do we do now?
I think that we work to get other folks elected to office. I really think that lobbying politicians such as those who are controlling the House of Representatives in Montana is pointless. For me personally, anyway, for a minute I'm taking off my hat, I think, as director of the Art Museum and saying that my efforts are going to be in campaigning and working for a fair government and better representation in government.
Yeah. You wonder whether the letter writing that we were doing or the calling of representatives had much impact. At the end, what I ended up doing was at the end, the Nevada and Virginia Cities project stalled, and it looked like it was going to go down.
Right.
Wednesday of last week, I thought it was gone.
Right.
I thought they had refused to fund it, and part of that was Missoula Democrats who voted against it, and they voted against it out of solid principle.
Right.
And I had to feel for them.
Was the last chip they had.
That was all they had. But on Thursday, I called them and asked them to hold their nose and vote for it. And luckily, they did.
Right.
Because now we have that priceless collection.
Right.
It was priced at $6.5 million. That Virginia and Nevada City collection, and it was done by an artist. An artist came to this community, or came to Montana, and saw the value of that, and spent his fortune basically in preserving it without state support. And
remarkable story.
And remarkable story. And the people who went through that collection and analyzed the assessment that he had done privately said, "Don't quibble with this."
Oh, I believe it.
Don't quibble that this $6.5 million is probably a really, really good investment that's going to bring in a lot of money into this state and a lot of attention to.
I'm excited about the potential of it.
But I'm really sorry about what they did to the arts.
Everybody is, and I think, I think what you're suggesting, what you suggested to the Missoula Democrats, was ultimately where those of us in the arts ended up too, which is a little bit like, well, this is a compromise of a really awful situation. Never should have been, but it really could have been worse. I think, the representatives were gunning for a full raid on the trust.
On the coal tax, on the coal tax itself, which was defeated. Yeah.
So and then on the cultural trust as well.
Right.
So I think
eliminate
that,
it. Yeah.
Right. So I think that that's worst case scenario, and we didn't end up with that. And also, I can get really excited about the potential for Virginia City and Nevada City as a cultural worker. I mean, the potential there is great. And historical museums is not my field, but I do keep an eye on it since I'm in the museum business. And it's, in some ways, more than art museums, is a most exciting field because it's developing most quickly from the sleepy, dull, academic place it's been to concepts of how to bring history alive and how to consider new interpretations of history and maybe side parallel with more accepted interpretations of history, and those kinds of concepts and challenges really excite me, and so I think the potential is great.
Yeah, you want things to come alive. You want the people who walk into a historical museum to walk away thinking that they didn't know everything already. On the contrary, that they walked out of that thinking, I never knew that.
Right.
There's an awful lot there that I never knew. I want to know more and more and more and more.
Right.
They just want to be stimulated by what they saw, that they didn't have all of the facts down in black and white in the history book, that instead we have a whole lot of work to do to uncover what really went on, or what we became as a state or as a people, through what went on in history.
And it's natural that changes as we evolve as a society. There are really reactionary elements to Montana, society and culture, of course, and part of that is this voice that, well, we know our history, this is the way it was, don't mess with it, you know? And people will get damn mad about, you know, about you messing with it. But, I mean, again, to look at Virginia City and that whole scenario and the incredible story of the vigilantes, you know, there's just recently been research, you know, released in a book form that changes our view of that whole story. You know, that needs to be brought into the picture. And one of the best examples of this kind of controversy is the sixth floor museum in Dallas, which is in the book repository building where Oswald shot Kennedy. And, you know, there's no doubt that he was involved in that assassination, but there's so many theories and debates and unresolved questions as to exactly how it took place and whether it was his was a single bullet and all that.
Right. But we know that something took place on the sixth floor.
So they preserved it just as it was the day they arrested him there. Put this armature, the museum armature within, so you could still see through to all the original everything, and leads you through just the whole period of that event, and at the end does posit the single bullet theory, but then also just acknowledges that it just isn't and can't stand as the answer. So it's a great example of how you can pit different opinions side by side and show the controversy and the foment of something. And
what you do is in a museum like that is that you treat people as if they can make their own decisions.
Yeah.
You treat people. You know, what's going on, what I see going on in this country is that there are a lot of people who believe that the people themselves can't make the decisions anymore.
Right.
That instead they need business and governmental representatives and bureaucrats to make the decisions for them.
Just let the corporations run things.
Let the corporations run things, and the political will to say, no, no, the people can run things. We need to give the people a voice. It isn't there yet, but I see some
signs of it.
Yeah, signs that's starting to happen.
At the sixth floor museum, the very last thing is a full room with these tables that are mounted on the wall, full of blank journals for the viewers to write in. And Jeff, I think they must have set up one and then realized they needed not one but 10, and not this thick but this thick, because it's incredible. It's this huge room. Each one of these things is hundreds and hundreds of pages, and they're full. People just write and write and write and write and write. So, yeah, I think, and that's a great example of a living history museum and what's possible if you engage the viewer. I think with art we have a harder problem, you know, but we're working all the time on that whole issue of how the learning process at the museum can be participatory. That's kind of, I think, you know, it's one of the keys to learning today and to museums tomorrow. You know, it's just that engagement.
In our father's generation, it was that you got one job with one employer and you worked until you were 65, and then you get retirement and you could go to Florida. And or go wherever you wanted to go. Maybe you wanted to go to Anaconda.
Right.
But now you picture how many times you're going to change positions, and you really need to be able to learn one thing after another, after another, and after another. Incorporate things in as you go.
Right.
And
our learning doesn't stop.
Yeah. And what you're saying about art is true, that people want to participate in the exhibit. They don't want to just look at it statically, you know, no. They want to become part of it. They want to share their impressions.
Right. And to circle back to one of the issues at the very beginning, Jeff, I think they also want to see themselves in it. You know, that identity issue. And that's why it's so important that the community is there too. Because they need to understand their context better and see themselves in it.
Yeah. Well, Laura, I think we're out of time. It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
I told you this was
quick.
going to happen, that when we get to the end of the conversation, it would be over. But
to be continued.
thank you.
Thank you.
I know it was hard for you to spare the time, and I appreciate
Oh, gosh.
the time.
No, it was my pleasure. Thanks.
And this is the end of the 5th conversation, and we invite you to stop back next week on Tuesday and watch a replay of an interview with Eric Johnson, who was the editor of The Independent, who's now working in California. So thanks for joining us. Maybe we'll see you next week. Bye.
People are talking about people. I hear them whisper. You won't believe it. They think we're lovers. Kept on the cover. I just ignore it. They keep saying, laugh just a little too loud, a little too stand just a little too close, stare just a little too long. Maybe they're saying something we don't know. Let's give them something to talk about. Something to talk about. Let's give them something to talk about. Something to talk about. I want a little something to talk about. I want your love. And I feel so foolish. I've never noticed time. Baby, you're acting so nervous, like you're falling. It took a rumor to make me wonder. Now I'm convinced that you're going under. Think about you every day. Dreaming about you every night. Hoping that you feel the same way. Now that we know it, let's really show it, baby. Come give me something to talk about. Something to talk about. A little mystery to figure out. Something to talk about. I want a little something to talk about. I want your love. Give me something to talk about, babe. I got some mystery. Why don't you just figure out? Give them something to talk about. How about listen up, baby. Well, this mystery won't hurt. Something to talk about. Give me something to talk about. How about all right. Something to talk about. Something to talk
Need to continue on. Is that I wish we had Ariel. And myself, knowledge. That did 1990. By golly. And I'd also like to have a better. We where the county damage. Trickles that got in the base. Coming down their backyard. We were able to in. They came to us and said, or they did it. We were the wastewater treatment plant system whenever you have water. These areas flow is 7 million BD foot. Increase to handle the extra flow. So that was good. Freeze into flooding. Potholes on Friday. Come out too. I think you might have read it. It's so unique with the pothole. Go back to the fall. We had so any street has some cracks that gets in your base. It's colder at night. All of a sudden here comes then you get ice expand. That's some, I would say, the base
sitting. And then it's about a our base up. Curves on the in addition to that. Bruce. Crowley, who was an engineer. And then Mr. What was
we knew that Jerry had. We called him out. Okay, how's it? What it's going to do, so that. And then we also had the and so he was that was premieres with us on Wednesday. So we I admittedly don't know. We were getting some that time, and they were everything. Every berm, visual. So that of the news. What happened? Maybe 3 and 8. But you have localized. We have a lot of problems. To the part of that area. We've had but they seem but we've never flows. Major the 19